Hi everybody, it's Christine speaking. Now this was going to be part 3 of the consecration and purification of the Bridal Company, but I've given it a fresh title all on its own because it is a message that can stand alone in discussing the topic, the furnace of waiting. So, we've been speaking in the last 2 messages about the Lord purifying and weeding out the rebellion, the pride, the self-preservation, the selfish ambition amongst his bridal company, and cleansing the company. We spoke about the removal of Korah and his cohorts from the company, and how the Lord started a process of revealing who was holy, who he had chosen, and who he would allow to come near him. And it was only after he had dealt with Korah, dealt with the 14,700 on the next day who was still muttering and moaning about Moses and Aaron and blaming God's judgments upon them. Only on the 3rd day in the morning did the newly budded, blossomed and fruiting rod of Aaron come out of the Holy of Holies and was displayed as evidence of the resurrection power of God resting upon Aaron's life. So we see that when God is going to reveal those who are his, like it speaks about in Malachi 3, where it says, the book of remembrance is written, and those who think on the Lord's name have their names written in that book, and they will be his jewels in the day he openly displays them. What the last 2 messages have emphasized is that there is a process leading up to the open displaying. Like the rod of Aaron was openly displayed with all its almonds and its leaves and blossoms, but before that there had been a cleansing and a removing of that which was unclean and rebellious. So now the Lord is just wanting to put his finger upon a specific process he uses in order to purify his bridal company, and it's called the furnace of waiting. Now we know that when Moses went up Mount Sinai, one day before he was supposed to come down, which was the 39th day, the people of God had got extremely tired of waiting for him to return, and they coerced Aaron into building them the golden calf. So this was the first furnace of waiting that happened in the wilderness. And what it revealed was the tendency to idolatry in the hearts of God's people. They were just about to enter into marriage covenant with the Lord, or they had just entered into, should I say, and yet they were immediately after that committing spiritual adultery because they couldn't handle waiting. They didn't want to wait one more day in order to hear what God said. 39 days of silence from God was too much for them to handle. And that furnace of waiting in that initial period caused hidden tendency towards idolatry and unfaithfulness to come to the surface. And when Moses came down the mountain and saw what they were doing, he called out and said, "Whoever is on the Lord's side, stand with me." And the tribe of Levi came and stood with Moses on the Lord's side. So they had already been set apart as belonging to the Lord. He took them for himself instead of the firstborn. And they were obviously there when the whole crowd of Israelites were worshipping the golden calf. But when a decision was made as to which side are you on, where are you going to stand, you can't be a fence sitter, one side or the other, the tribe of Levi chose to stand with the Lord. And then Moses commanded them to execute God's judgments amongst the idolaters. And that must have been a really difficult thing for them, because obviously they knew some of the people they were putting to the sword. And then in the second year, God dealt with Korah and Dathan and Abiram and the rebellion against Moses and Aaron, and that was also a cleansing. In the golden calf episode, it was asked, who is on the Lord's side? In the Korah episode, the question was, are you going to not associate with the tents of these wicked men? Make a choice to not associate, and there you will be spared. So the first choice was associate with the Lord, and you will be spared, and then don't associate with the wicked, and you will be spared. Now, presumably, Korah had stood on the Lord's side the year before, when Moses asked who's on the Lord's side, or he would have been killed. But even though he officially went and stood on the Lord's side and helped to execute the judgments, there was still hidden rebellion, pride, and selfish ambition in his heart. But it didn't show until a year later. Now, you know, this furnace of waiting is quite a thing. All of us find it difficult to wait. And we know that when the people of God were led to the foot of Mount Sinai by the cloud, they camped there. But do you know that that cloud did not move for almost another whole year? Numbers 10:11 tells us that on the 20th day of the second month of the second year, the cloud moved. So for almost a full year, those people were camped at Sinai. And a year of wilderness life can bring out some really ugly things lurking in one's heart when there's no movement or progress in one's life. Yes, there were things that happened during that year in between the camping at the foot of Mount Sinai and the moving of the cloud, but it wasn't happening for the majority of people. Remember, Moses went up and down Mount Sinai a few times, and then on Yom Kippur came back down with the blueprints for the furniture of the holy place, and he got Bezalel and his helper to make that furniture. But for the vast majority of the camp of the Israelites, nothing much was happening. They woke up every morning in their tents, the cloud was stock still on top of the mountain, and they just had monotony day after day. And there's nothing like the furnace of waiting to bring hidden dross to the surface in your heart. God sometimes turns up the heat by making you wait. And I want to ask you, is there no movement in your life spiritually? Are you wondering why God hasn't released the instruction to go forward? Is the cloud not moving in your life? Does it seem that there's a delay? Well, it won't move until the waiting period, until the furnace of waiting triggers the hidden sin of the heart to surface. And meekness is the goal. Meekness is a word that was used to describe Moses. A submitted heart, a heart that delights to do the will of God. And what that waiting period for almost a full year in the wilderness did was it brought to the surface the questioning of God's choices, the questioning of God's wisdom, the questioning of his timing, and complaining against the Lord. All these things are rooted in a lack of the fear of the Lord. When one heats silver in a crucible, at a certain point the dross begins to come to the surface, and the silver iron is bonded to the dross, but when a certain level of heat is reached, that bond is broken, and the silver thrusts the dross away from it. And dross always has to be attached to something, so whatever that dross is, it goes and attaches to the side of the crucible, and then the liquid pure silver is then decanted into another container. So the period of the furnace and the crucible is a time of waiting until the dross surfaces and becomes visible, and it is thrust away. Only pure liquid silver is poured out into the next chapter. The furnace of waiting separates that which is holy and set apart to the Lord from the dross of self. Satan said, I will ascend, I will be like the Most High. Korah said, they take too much upon themselves. Who do they think they are? We are all holy. The I, the hidden pride, the hidden spiritual ambition, the hidden rebellion against the choices and decisions of God, all came to the surface during that year of waiting. And as I mentioned, Numbers 10:11 says, on the second day of the second month, which is the month of Iyar, in the second year, the cloud moved, and it went on a 3-day journey to find a resting place for them. Now the cloud moved before the word speaks about Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and the other prominent men rising up and criticizing Moses and Aaron. But I can guarantee you that those thoughts and feelings and attitudes were rising to the surface before the cloud moved. Last year in November, I released a message called Shifting from Sinai to Paran. And I spoke of the different works of the Spirit in the Bridal Company in the wilderness of Sinai and in the wilderness of Paran. In the wilderness of Paran, there is a display of the glory of God and the power of God through the sons of the right hand. But before this happens, the purification, the sifting, the removal of rebellion and pride and idolatry has to be dealt with. So Numbers 10 verse 12 says that the people made their journey out of the wilderness of Sinai by stages. And there were 3 particular places where they camped before they got to the wilderness of Paran. The names of these places were Taberah, Kibroth Hattava, and Hazeroth. Now at Taberah, the people were grumbling and complaining about their hardships. And it says that the fire of the Lord devoured the outlying edges of the camp. So Taberah means burning. Here we see the judgment of the Lord on grumbling and complaining about hardship. These people were given manna every single day to eat. They were protected by the cloud from the sun during the day. They were kept warm by the pillar of fire at night. They were led in the wilderness, and yet they complained about their hardship. So God dealt with idolatry with the golden calf episode, the first 40-day waiting period. And then the 360-day waiting period was to bring all sorts of other dross to the surface. One of it was grumbling and complaining about, which is self-pity basically, isn't it? So God deals with self-pity. And then in Numbers 11 verse 4, it says that the mixed multitude lusted for the food of Egypt. This speaks of the lust of the flesh. 1 John 2 verse 16 speaks of 3 things that do not come from the Father, they are of the world. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. Now the lust of the eyes is connected to the golden calf episode. They were not happy because they could not see someone who would represent God to them, and so they desired to have something physical that they could see, that they could follow. They wanted that. They wanted one of the gods of Egypt to worship and to carry in front of them. The lust of the flesh was the give us meat to eat, when God supplied the quails, and then while the meat was still between their teeth, he executed judgment on them for their lusts, because they were dissatisfied with the provision of God. And then the pride of life is demonstrated in the episode with Korah, when the tribe of Levi was cleansed of rebellion and pride and selfish ambition. But just before Korah was dealt with, the family of Moses was dealt with. Do you remember that Moses married an Egyptian woman? And Miriam and Aaron complained and criticized his choice. And then God struck Miriam with leprosy. She was obviously the instigator of this gossip against her brother. And God put her outside the camp for 7 days. And the place where this happened was Hazeroth, the third camping place before they went to the wilderness of Paran. Now, why did God deal differently with Miriam than he dealt with Korah? Because when Aaron and Miriam criticized Moses' choice, it was kept within the family. They didn't infect the whole of the Israelite population camped at Sinai. They didn't spread the word abroad. They just privately criticized Moses, and they criticized his choice. But in Korah's case, Korah's rebellion and pride spread infection, and Korah criticized God's choice. Not Moses' choice, God's choice. And Korah criticized position, the position in which they stood before God. So it was a much more serious thing to criticize the choices of God or to criticize the choices of a leader that God has put in place. So this furnace of waiting is something that God uses over and over again to bring out of our hearts and to the surface so that we can see when we look in the mirror what's there. Brings the things out. There's nothing else that brings it to the surface like having to wait. As I've mentioned often before, we are a microwave generation. Everything has to be instant. Remember with Jeremiah, after 10 days of seeking the Lord for a word for the people, then God spoke to him. Now we would give up on day 2 or 3. We don't like waiting for anything. And for the people to have a year of waiting, almost a full year of waiting, before there was spiritual movement and movement out of the wilderness of Sinai. God only got the cloud to move after Miriam had been outside the camp 7 days and brought back in. Then in Numbers 12:16 it says, afterward they removed from Hazeroth and encamped in the wilderness of Paran. Now I would suggest, if you can, go back and listen to or read that message, shifting from Sinai to Paran, because this cleansing of the people of God in this waiting period of grumbling and complaining, of moaning about their situation, of being full of self-pity, of the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, all these things surfaced because they were held in position like tent pegs in the sand, waiting to be moved to the next chapter. And many of us are in positions of waiting. We're aware that God is going to be taking us on into the next chapter, but for some reason his finger seems to be on the pause button. And so we need to ask the Spirit of truth to search us. Is there any wicked way in us? Lead us in the way everlasting, so that we can deal with these things. Because once there's a shift to the wilderness of Paran, then the judgments become really severe. That's where, in the wilderness of Paran, that the ground opened and swallowed Korah. That's where the 14,700 were struck dead because they were moaning and muttering that God had killed Korah and co. The furnace of waiting is a necessary tool in the purification of the bridal company. Let's ask God to open our eyes and open our ears to see ourselves clearly as we look in the mirror, that we can be like that silver in that crucible, and once the dross has surfaced and we see it for what it is, thrust it from us. I want no part in rebellion. I want no part in self-pity. I want no part in grumbling. I want no part in complaining. I want no part in the fear of man. I want no part in criticizing your work and your ways and your timing, God. Forgive me. I'm so sorry that I've found fault with the way you do things and your timing, Lord. Forgive me. I submit to your superior wisdom. I submit to your superior timing. I submit to the fact that you know everything and I only know in part. Cleanse my heart, Lord. Cleanse my heart. Don't take your Holy Spirit from me. We want to be part of those sons of the right hand who God displays his power through. We want to be part of those who the Lord displays as his jewels. But we have to go through this time of the cleansing of our hearts. And it's never comfortable to see what rises up in our hearts in the waiting period. It's never comfortable to see that, oh, I'm actually prone to self-pity and I'm quite a moaner. Oh, and I actually am longing after the things of the world, and jeepers, I don't really like the fact that I'm being held on pause in this place. God could so quickly and easily open the door to the next chapter. Why doesn't he do it? All these things are a lack of the fear of the Lord. You know, in Isaiah 11, it speaks about the 7 spirits of God that rested upon Jesus. Spirit of wisdom and revelation, the spirit of counsel and might, the spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord, and the spirit of the sovereign Lord. And you know, we're very prone to crying out for more revelation, more wisdom, more knowledge. We want more of the spirit of might. But who of us really pursues and hungers after more of the spirit of the fear of the Lord? Because that is the thing that is displayed in meekness. The fear of the Lord, that we tremble at his word. Isaiah 66 says, God says, heaven is my throne and earth is my footstool. Where is the house you'll build for me? But I make my dwelling with him who trembles at my word. When God speaks, do we tremble? Do we tremble at the thought that we might be found criticizing God or questioning him? Or is there still a lot of self in us? The furnace of waiting is what has appointed us to bring the lack of the fear of the Lord in all its manifestations to the surface, so we can repent of it, thrust it from us, and become like that completely liquid, free-flowing silver. No solidity in us, no stubbornness in us, no resistance in us. We're willing to submit to whatever the Spirit of the Lord wants in our lives because we delight to do his will. So, precious friends, may the Lord bless you, and may the Spirit of truth lead you and guide you as you think about these things, and may you be granted a willing heart to run in the path of his commandments. In Jesus' name.